leading up to Halloween, I knew I had to make a video surrounding horror movies, but I didn't know what on. I partly wanted to continue my list of important films every aspiring cinematographer needs to watch, but just fill it with horror and thriller movies, and partly wanted to look at weird horror films that I like. So, to compromise, in today's video, I'm going to look at a few unconventional horror/thriller films with good cinematography that I really like. Now, today's video is going to be more of a mix of horror and thriller films, as I think just doing one genre would get boring quickly. I'll be discussing a range of films, why you should watch them, and why the cinematography is important. Starting with one of Nicolas Cage's comeback films, I think it's safe to say that Color Out of Space has some of the most striking cinematography of any horror/sci-fi film from the past few years. Not only is there a vibrant use of colour, but it also doesn't feel out of place. Why do I have it first on my list though? Well, it's because off the top of my head, I can't think of any other horror film with this much colour, and I think it really adds a unique element to how the story was told. With most films, you can rely on colour to portray a meaning, blue and sadness, red and danger, but with this, they can't really do that. You had more explosions of pinks and purples, which whilst they can be associated with meaning, are more famous for being the colours of nebulas and space in general. Just to make it clear, I'm talking about the 2007 version of Funny Games, which is kind of a remake of the original 1997 film, but not really because Haneke originally wanted it set in America but had to set it in Austria for practical reasons. But anyway, why should you watch it? Well, it's one of the most thrilling films I've ever seen. I saw it once back in 2020 and I could easily play the movie back in my head today. But one of the reasons it stayed in my mind for so long is Konji's cinematography. Now, Haneke is known for his visual style as he likes to take the reins when it comes to his films, but credit for the practical side still has to go to the cinematographer. Now, even though throughout the film is rather flat, largely devoid of colour and quite clinical, it's still used to represent tone in a scene, but this lets it have a lot more meaning. A stark red, yellow now means much more than it would have if it were used normally. In a rare case that Robin Williams plays the antagonist, we have 1 Hour Photo, the psychological horror surrounding a lonely photo developer with a fixation on a specific family. But that isn't the reason I originally watched it. It was in fact because it was photographed by one of my favourite cinematographers of all time, Jeff Cronenworth. Now, what gets me about the cinematography here is that it feels largely like a photo. The lighting, composition, different filters. Then we also have the observant aspect where it feels like we are watching the film through Seymour's eyes, although I will say it is hard to get through without occasionally pausing. For the first and only black and white film on the list, there isn't a better one than Eraserhead. Well, there probably is, but I really wanted to include some David Lynch in this list. Now, out of all of the films today, I'd say the story here is the most important aspect out of everything, as even though it's a bit convoluted, it's an extremely important film and everyone should give it a watch at some point. As for the cinematography though, the film starred 2 cinematographers, Roderick Elms and Herbert Cardwell, with Elms later shooting films like Patterson and Broken Flowers, and Cardwell passing just after the film was released. With an experimental style, dark shadows and strong noir lighting, the DPs created an extraordinary and very surrealist atmosphere. As for a lesser known film, and one that I watched only recently, we have Punishment Park, and whilst watching it, I couldn't help but feel like the cinematography was rather organic, yet quite bare. I find that it's actually quite telling of the story as a whole though. Now, whilst this isn't necessarily a horror film, and it's more of a war thriller, I feel like the documentary aspect and how they shot it in that style really helps portray the realism aspect that they were after. How do you get that look though? Well, from what I've noted in this, the use of colour, observing from afar and choosing the right landscape. I can't imagine this film would have felt the same if it was set in a meadow. As for the last film on the list today, we have one of my favourite modern horror films. It got a lot of publicity last year, but since, I really haven't heard much of it. Half of that is because a lot of the reviews said the same thing of it looks beautiful but is kind of slow and empty, and the other half of that is just the fact that it's more of an autumn/winter based film. However, it really stuck out to me and was easily my favourite horror film last year. As for the cinematography, however, as I mentioned, it's beautiful. The landscapes are incredible to look at and Eli Aronson really leaned into them. The colours feel very Scandinavian and it feels quite fresh for horror, but so does this new era for films that A24 has picked up. Stuff like Midsommar or The Witch could have easily taken this place, but for me, this is the one that stood out. It's only after writing this video that I've realised that this is more of a mixed list of horror, thriller and crime films than I originally thought, with some of them being all three, but I think the unconventional cinematography point still stands. If there are any films that you think I should have included in this list, and I'm sure there will be, let me know down below and I'll probably include them in next year's video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. You know what to do if you did. If you have a recommendation for an analysis, leave it down below. Thanks so much for watching and bye, we'll see you next time. Bye!